Hey Dan,
Hi,
thanks so
Dan.
thanks so much for speaking with me. Just going to talk with you today about mental health in a time of COVID. And you work with an organization called Sanctuary. I was wondering if you could briefly tell us what Sanctuary does, who you are, and what Sanctuary does.
Mm, great. So yes, yeah, my name is Dan Whitehead. I am the CEO of Sanctuary Mental Health Ministries. Have been doing that for 4 years. Um, Sanctuary is a 9-year-old nonprofit. It was founded by the Reverend Dr. Sharon Smith, who's actually a Regent grad like me. And Sanctuary really exists to be an organization that helps churches to talk about faith and mental health. How do we find a new way of talking about this when we consider the theological perspective, the clinical perspective, and the voice of lived experience, and really in listening to each of those sort of voices, or to those looking through those different lenses, we find a new way of talking about this subject, which is really to create a theology of mental health. And the really cool thing about this intersection is massively under-resourced. I mean, that's a tragedy, but the exciting thing for us is we get to be part of this very exciting, pretty new intersection, and we're already able to connect with the significant voices who are speaking to this. People like Reverend Professor John Swinton, who is the world's leading expert on this. He is actually an ambassador for Sanctuary. Dr. Hilary McBride, who's a local therapist, is someone else who's an ambassador for us. And even people like Reverend Professor Chris Cook at the University of Durham. We actually I was talking with Chris just the other day. So we are drawing from this rich new field and trying to create new ways for churches to have conversations and shared learning experiences around mental health, so that the church can become the safest place for people in the midst of a crisis.
Speaking of crisis, we are in the midst of a crisis, a global pandemic right now. And even before this pandemic hit, I realize this is an American study, but last year in 2019, a study found 61% of Americans feel lonely.
Hmm.
And the number, surprising to me, the number is highest in the 18 to 22-year-old range, the Gen Z.
Yeah, it's a great couple of questions there. I think it's also worth noting that the number one social issue that Vancouver faces is social isolation. That is the number one issue facing. So Vancouver is kind of regarded as one of the loneliest cities in North America. So
And
that's an
you're talking about before COVID.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, before COVID. Yeah, yeah. So that's an interesting point to pick up another time. But so I think there's a couple of ways of approaching that. I think the first thing I'd say is, when we talk about mental health, one of the key strands of Sanctuary's teaching is to make this a communal conversation. We advocate for the fact that every human being has mental health. The issue isn't so much do you have it or not. The issue is, are you languishing in your mental health, or are you flourishing? And depending on what's going on in our lives, circumstances, biological makeup, spiritual factors, and normally a combination of all of these things and others, will dictate whether you're flourishing or languishing, or whether you're moving from languishing to flourishing, or vice versa. So the point is, this is a dynamic conversation. And when we introduce the kinds of the social distancing, the type of news that we have been bombarded with over the last 3 or 4 months, the way social media does the same, when you take a person and you create these limitations and then bombard them with news the way that it happens, I think it's almost impossible for that person to fully know flourishing, or at least it's very, very hard. Take away interaction with others, relationship, add in a lot of fear, and some of that may be justifiable, and a lot of it won't be. But the point is, I think all of us are prone to having poor mental health at this time. So when you take people who have pre-existing conditions, or people who are particularly vulnerable, I know there have been a lot of research talking about how encouraging children to stay at home, if you're I mean, I'm British originally, so I tend to think of classes, but I know middle class isn't so much a thing here. But if you think of me being a typically middle class British person, I think, oh, my children at home. Oh no, how am I going to get my life alongside that? How am I going to do life? That's kind of my primary issue. And yet many of the challenges that they're saying is, well, there are many families who don't fit into that sort of middle class bubble for whom a home is not a safe place. So children are now having to stay at home with potentially dangerous or difficult scenarios in their home life. So there are a whole other different types of challenges that people are facing. So I guess my point is, this is the potential to derail all of us, and I think we should all have permission and feel permission to feel diminished, mentally speaking, by what's going on, let alone people who experience anxiety or general anxiety disorder. As one example, definitely from talking with people, from the research we're beginning to see, those experiences of those things are being heightened during this time, inevitably, when people's support structures are being removed from them. So yeah, I think everyone's being affected, but certainly people who are experiencing anxiety or isolation probably have a heightened vulnerability at the moment. And in terms of what we can do, I think we have to think really creatively, because we've never been in this situation. This is a totally unprecedented time. So we have to think creatively about how do we connect with people. If we have a good theology of personhood, theological anthropology, which we'll probably get into a bit in a minute, we understand that we need relationships, we need others, and God has fearfully and wonderfully made us in such a way that our sense of self is located in our sense of community. At least it should be. So I think what we need to do is be really creative in how we connect with people. How do we empathize? How do we say to people, explicitly or implicitly, I see you, I notice you, and I care? And that can look like physically going to someone's house and standing outside and waving at them. It could look like checking in with them on digital platforms. It could be phone calls. But I think the whole body of Christ has to work overtime to do that at the moment, because a few pastors can't cope with the level of need. So I think it's a community-wide conversation, and we need to think creatively about how we're going to do that.
So COVID is it's just a society-wide and global time of testing in many ways, which is shining a light on some of the faulty assumptions and some of the weaknesses in our culture that were there pre-COVID, but this situation just brings them into light all the more.
One of the key things for churches to press into, and anyone who I think has their finger on the pulse of what is happening in society, and I would include Dr. Jim Houston in this, when you look at what he's been giving his work and efforts to in the last few years around anthropology. I think that's one of the key things in our time. And I think COVID has revealed that our culture has a false view of personhood. There's a bold statement there, but I really think we are often encouraged implicitly to view people as primarily biomedical beings. So if you have a mental illness, we will label it that way, and labels can be helpful or unhelpful, but certainly seeing someone as an illness is not helpful ever. So to say someone is a depressive or or bipolar, that's a label that I wouldn't put on anyone, but people can certainly suffer with those experiences. I think we have to ask the question is, do we implicitly buy into an idea that says, if I give you enough medicine, then you'll be fixed, or then you'll be normal, and then you can integrate properly? And if that's how we perceive personhood, we're really only buying into a biological view of person, a medical view, an idea that doctors are the answers to all our problems. And I happen to be a big fan of doctors. I've been using them my whole life, and I'd thoroughly recommend having good doctors in your life who can help you. And certainly people with mental health challenges need good doctors. We need wonderful doctors who will support and medicate as they need to, and things like that. But more than that, a human being, of course, is way more than that. We are a spirit. We are biological, we are psychological, we are social, and we are spiritual. We are messy, integrated wholes. And one of the things that this season, I think, has revealed is that there is more to us. There has to be more to us than just our ability to produce stuff or just our ability to do stuff, simply because many of us haven't been able to produce or do stuff in this season. And many of the people that our culture holds up for us to admire are stuck at home like the rest of us, doing Zoom interviews with bad cameras like the rest of us, right? So, and that's now going on primetime TV. So the whole world has been turned upside down. And I think there is an opportunity for the church to re-endow people's sense of personhood, to re-look at anthropology through a theological lens that says a person is not primarily valued by what they do or what they can do or how they look or how well they are, but biologically speaking. A person is valued according to the strength of their relationships. Because we are relational beings made in the image of a relational God, called into a relationship with God, and our relationship to God is also predicated on the strength of our relationships to others, to the created order, and to ourselves. So you can't remove one relationship out and say, oh, I'm just going to focus on my relationship with God. Well, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Love others, love God, love self, as that command could be rephrased, suggests that our value cannot be attached to what we can produce. Our value is attached to how we relate. And that ultimately, I think, is an issue of shalom. That the biblical definition of wellness is to experience shalom, to be in right relationship to God and therefore others, self, and creation. That would be my thesis. So I tend to draw on, I think it was Darrell Johnson. So forgive me, Darrell, if it wasn't, or maybe thank me if it's something good. I think it was Darrell Johnson who talked about shalom as right relatedness. So, to know that, and shalom talks of peace. Peace is how we translate it, to know peace. But it's not just knowing peace in a kind of cerebral way or in a biological or medical way. It's knowing peace at every fiber of our being, and not only every fiber of our being, but every fiber of society. There's this vision of that God is drawing us into a future in which his shalom, his peace, his ultimate peace is manifest, which has implications for every atom of creation, every fiber of our being, our relationships, everything. So I think if we are moving towards that goal of peace and right relatedness, that includes how we relate to others and ourselves, and I think creation and God, and they're all connected. So if that's our definition of wellness, you could say someone could have a diagnosed mental illness, for instance, but if they're experiencing shalom, maybe because they have a great doctor and they've got the right medication and they have a great therapist and they have a great family who support them and they have a great rhythm of eating and sleeping, and they have a church who pray for them and who give them space to have good days and bad days, it's possible for that person to be experiencing shalom, right relatedness, as opposed to, say, an Olympic athlete who has won 50 gold medals and the world admires, who may not be experiencing shalom. So the definition of wellness and the definition of how do we gauge when someone is winning at life, I think we need to look at the Bible. We need to understand, what does the Bible define as success? Whereas all too often it's too easy to just follow a cultural narrative that says do more, achieve more. If you do and achieve, if you're healthy and wealthy, then you get thumbs up, you're doing well. Well, COVID, I think, is revealing that is nonsense. The Bible has already said that. I mean, it's very clear that isn't a definition of success or value in God's sight.
I just read today that Harvard researchers have said that we might be facing intermittent social distancing right through 2022, possibly. And of course, that's a prediction they're making now. I mean, we just don't know. But what lessons do you think we should be learning about mental health, no matter if we are dealing with the social distancing for a long time, or if we go back to something that looked a bit like the conditions of the old normal, but just a way of renewing our thinking and our actions toward mental health and loving each other.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think I think one of the things we're kind of learning, and there's research that supports this, that at a point of crisis, a lot of people will often turn to ask metaphysical questions. They're like, what is my purpose? Why am I here? They won't be asking how we got here. They'll be asking the why question. So I think the church is uniquely positioned to address that. And there's a very hope-filled answer in there. So I think the church ultimately has a message that says a key part of who you are and a key part of your wellness, irrespective of any medical diagnosis you've received or an experience you're having, but a key part of who you are is that you're made in the image of God, and spirituality has something to offer you in terms of making it through this time. So, I would say the role of the church is just as important as the role of doctors. And I believe the role of doctors is really important. That's not to denigrate the role of doctors, it's to raise up the role of the church. And spiritual support is essential in someone finding purpose and hope. And that's why actually many recovery models, recovery being a sort of self-determined way of moving forward in your life, which is never straightforward, but a number of recovery models always make place for the transcendent, even if they don't put a name to it the way we would as Christians. And that's like the 12-step program. It always places that something beyond the transcendent is paramount to that system working. It's central. So similarly, I think the church is uniquely positioned to be scratching that itch that society has of what is my purpose. So I think we must remember that. I also think when we look at our history and think about the role the church has played in society at a point of crisis, historically, the church, by and large, has always had something to say. And that message is consistent, which is we're present, we're here, we're not going anywhere, we care. And where other people will shy away or step out, the church will step in. So, and that I think will take bravery for many of us, because we haven't been in this situation before. We haven't, certainly my generation and the one before me, we haven't lived through world wars, and we haven't had a threat like this in our lifetime. So I think we'd do well to open our history books and look back at how the church has responded in the past to the bubonic plagues in Europe, to the war, to needs in the Middle Ages, to Victorian England when schools and things emerged and education became. I think similarly the church has to innovate and think, what is it that society needs? And it's nothing new. It's people need hope. They need to know that they belong. They need to know that they're loved. And I think we can give them that good news. So yeah, I don't have any hard and fast answers other than maybe we need to look backwards as we look forwards and see what the church has always historically done.
I just recently became aware of a concept in some recovery models that talks about meaning making. And you kind of anticipated some of this in your previous answer. But meaning making is an important part of fostering mental health or just whole person wellness, and especially at a time of COVID. For me, when I hear the term meaning making, I think, well, you could stumble upon a strong meaning, or you could, if you're making a meaning in the midst of a circumstance, you could make a very flimsy one that could be toppled by the next crisis maybe that comes along.
Yeah, there's obviously a very interesting philosophical question there about do we make meaning, or does meaning make us? And you want to believe as people of faith that we're being made by the meaning that we draw from. I think if we were to try and create our own meaning, that could go well, but it could go badly, or it could just be very superficial. So again, I think it's really helpful for the church to think through what do we have to bring to that conversation around meaning making. I think for me, personally, I feel like I would sort of light up and go, well, yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about meaning. Let's talk about the telos. Let's talk about where we're going. Let's talk about, where is this heading? And there was an article, was it N.T. Wright wrote in Time? Was it Time? I want to say it was in Time magazine, but that doesn't sound right.
I think you're right.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, okay. And he was talking about, what our Christian response should be to this pandemic, and it was. I mean, I can't remember exactly, but the gist of it was, well, we kind of we kind of don't have a response. So the response is that God is present and with us and in the midst with us. I think that's the ultimate point of what he wrote, which I think in itself offers all kinds of profound and mysterious opportunities for exploration. What does it mean for the one who holds and sustains all things to draw near to people? And it's that promise that ultimately undergirds our hope. Um, and that is a very different thing. I would suggest that breeds joy, which is a very different thing from the pursuit of happiness. The pursuit of happiness is not a Christian ideal. That's more of a Buddhist practice. I mean, you can do that if you want, but my experience of happiness is that it's fleeting. It comes and goes, and you can run after it. You might get it, but then after a couple of days, you'll be missing it. Whereas joy is meant to be this deep-rooted, sustaining thing that holds us. So even in the midst of crisis, even in the midst of utter darkness, even in the midst of facing death itself, there is something within us that says, but you, God, are with me. And when we read the Psalms are lament. That's how, I mean, all but two of them, I think, actually, that's how they work. They say everything's terrible. This is not good. I've got no foothold. The bottom has fallen out of my life. But then there's this realization in the Psalm of Lament when the psalmist will say, but you, God, are with me and you are faithful. And somehow that shifts the perspective to a place of worship, even in the midst of darkness. So I think, meaning making is an interesting pursuit. Again, there's probably an opportunity there for the church to jump in and say, yeah, let's talk about meaning. We actually have something to say about that, and we've had something to say about that for thousands of years, which should encourage everyone that you are so much more than a commodity, than a wage or a salary or a social media post. You are a beloved child of God, made in his image, capable of strong relationship with the living God. I think if you want meaning, there's your meaning.